great, even though we have to deal a lot with the computer problems and Zoom problems and internet connection problems, but I'm really happy to be here. And so my background is in cognitive film studies, and I have been researching viewing experiences that are tied to media, where one's body is engaged in a much different way than what we are used to in cinema spaces. So I worked with smartphone spectatorship, where viewers generally hold a screen in their hands, which allows for some sensory adjustments. And I also work with various forms of virtual reality. And today I'm going to talk about a model that I developed for studying cinematic virtual reality and narrative experiences from a phenomenological and narrative approach. So cinematic virtual reality is a form of storytelling that is growing with huge steps, but it involves interaction, a lot of interaction, as the sensory scope, the visual information and sonic information one has access to is very much tied to how our body or which direction our body and head is looking. So these interactions are undefined in times and in ways. So this means that the viewer can freely move their heads and bodies as much as their body allows to look around in the 360 space. So the viewer in this case is an external observer of a diegetic world, but still has a sensation of diegetic presence. And this has been discussed in previous panels, but also elsewhere a lot, that because of the presence of the 360 space, we kind of feel physically present in this environment. And it's because we don't really have access to any other sensory information from the physical environment. So the physical environment is masked by the sensory information in the virtual environment. But the sensation of involvement in this diegetic world is a little bit uncanny, because even though the viewer feels present in a digital or mediated space, there is little contact with, or in cinematic virtual reality, most of the time there's no contact, but in some cases there is. With characters, we can't really influence the plot and have effect on the outcome of narrative events. But this also means that the viewer's position is some sort of a bubble. The viewer is always safe. We cannot be affected by atrocities in the diegetic world. So the moving image content fills the visual scope and the 360 space, but this also means that there's more visual information than what we can access to at any moment because of the nature of human vision. So I mentioned that interactions in most of these cases are based on turning one's head and body to change sensory perspective. And again, there are forms of or like genres within cinematic virtual reality where there are more types of interactions, but just to simplify it, I will focus on this one. So you look around in the 360-degree space. And so interactions are based on a bunch of factors, including the contingencies of the 300-degree space and the cinematic virtual reality presentation and screening technologies, and our bodily capabilities, and our personal decisions and preferences. So this means that we can change our position when we feel like based on our own decisions. For example, I don't want to look at one particular segment of the space, so I just turn away. This can be disgust, this can be interest in other parts of the space, which could direct my my decisions and my gaze. These decisions or these changes in the direction of observation can also be based on the sensory information, the sensory stimuli derived from environment, the environment. Be lights, sound that could trigger our interactions. Yeah, but so there are two more factors that interactions are based on, which are usually neglected in studies of cinematic virtual reality. And these are the storytelling elements and social context. So we as viewers engage emotionally and socially with characters. We understand their mimics, we understand their reactions, interactions with each other, which could also lead to our decisions, conscious or unconscious decisions to change our sensory scopes. And another factor here, which I just really quickly introduce is, or talk about, is proprioception and the viewer's bodily position in relation to the sensory information we have access to. So in a lot of movies, for example, in The Calling, which is shown on the slide, the viewer's viewpoint is fixed, but there is no body attached to this point of view. So if we look down, we see just a void where our legs would otherwise be, and this creates a different kind of sensation. This creates a sensation that where we are present in a diegetic space, but our body is not. And in other cases, for example, in Google Spotlight Stories Back to the Moon, the viewer's position is in a dark space. It's a little bit like a theater experience. One is sitting in a dark space without any particular visual characteristics, but follows events in front of them and around them, directed by motion of the characters and lights. And another one, which I think is a really good example, is MEWB, a movie about a toy robot, and the viewer sees all the events unfolding through the viewpoint of this toy robot. And so it's really clearly defined where the point of observation is. We can identify with the sort of body or the object of this robot, because we see everything through its eyes, its camera, so to say. And it's really interesting that in this movie, it's not not perfectly defined, or it's perfectly defined where the viewpoint of the viewer is, but it also, there's also like some playing with how it corresponds to a human, able human bodies and adults standing bodies viewpoints. So for example, this robot is very often placed on a coffee table or chair, so that its eye level, the camera level, corresponds to the eye level of characters. So different direction. So viewing experience in cinematic virtual reality is based on two key mental and cognitive activities. One is interaction, which is based again on external triggers from the movie, for example, or internal triggers like personal interest or disgust, and the process of witnessing a story. And so I will quickly return to why I wrote interacting first and witnessing second, or what this order means in a second. But so this means that a viewing experience involves perception. So we receive visual and sonic information. We unconsciously or consciously evaluate the quality of this information and intervene or interact. And so to organize this into a model, I developed this, or like I explained this as kind of a circle. So we witness something that unfolds in front of our eyes, or we can hear, and based on what we witnessed, we can make decisions or evaluate whether we have to change or we want to change the position of viewing. This is the interaction part, and by this interaction, we get access to a new scope of visual information or sonic information. And so this I actually developed for the case of smartphone spectatorship, but adapted to cinematic virtual reality, involving the spectator's embodied presence, bodily position, and its relation with the 360-degree space. So just to quickly walk you through this, graph, is that the viewer's position defines the access to sensory information within the 360 space. This defines one sensory scope, and that, as well as embodied presence or the sensation of the viewer's body, lead to the cognition and comprehension of a narrative, which is again based on witnessing, processing, and interaction. So what I want to, or have used this model for, is to study the question of sensory scope in cinematic virtual reality. What are the elements that proper decision making for changing the sensory perspective, so like turning our body or head? What are the elements that proper attention shift? What is the role of associations, and what is the role of sonic indices when visual attention is limited? So how we can comprehend information only from sonic information when something happens in the 360 diegetic space is behind our back. So this is when associations can be used. And another part of it is to study engagement and immersion. So for example, how does bodily control decision-making and interactions, and the viewer's embodied presence affect engagement and the sensation of presence? And so some parts of these I started to empirically assess. I have done some behavioral studies comparing cinematic virtuality and screen-based viewing. Originally, this was supposed to be a lab study, but part of it was completed online because of the pandemic, and we will see how the rest will proceed. But so to test recollection and memory characteristics, and also immersion and emotional engagement, so the differences in these between cinematic virtuality and screen-based viewing. And so our results showed that recollection is less accurate. So since we don't have access to all the information that we would have access on a regular screen, it is less accurate but more vivid, and recollection happens mostly from inside of the story world. So this is how our participants remembered narrative events from inside the story world. They also experienced greater sense of presence and were less aware of the physical space, although many of them reported nausea. And just to wrap it up, what is coming in this series of studies is to study the correlation between attention and recollection. This is where I would want to answer questions about associations. So whether one has to see different narrative information in order to remember the narrative correctly. So this I do with the combination of eye tracking and recollection accuracy tests, and also to test cognitive load to see if it really is more challenging or complicated to gain a narrative understanding of a story presented in cinematic virtual reality. So this is from my side, and thank you for your attention.